The 9 Golden Age visitors who were truly malevolent were exposed by Johnny Carson. Over the course of 30 years, Johnny Carson brought the biggest talents in America into people's living rooms. Viewers thought they were witnessing old friends reminisce over coffee because of his warm smile and effortless giggle. Carson's smile, however, frequently vanished when the cameras stopped and the crowd left. America's favorite host, according to those closest to him, maintained a mental blacklist of visitors he deemed to be genuinely awful people. Stated that Johnny, a former Tonight Show producer who collaborated with Carson for more than 10 years, was the epitome of professionalism on camera. However, as soon as we switched to commercial, he would occasionally turn to Ed and mutter, "That person should never be near a camera or a child." Carson's candor regarding the superstars he had secretly hated throughout his career grew in his last years. The unsettling tales he shared with close friends depict adored figures who were hideous behind their meticulously manicured public personas. What was most stunning were Carson's disclosures about a great actress who, while sitting on his couch, seemed kind and sensitive, had verbally abused a young production assistant so severely backstage that security had to step in. Additionally, the host almost contacted the police because of the well-liked male celebrity Carson found doing something so unsettling in his dressing area. It wasn't only demanding stars or challenging personalities. According to Carson, they were truly sinister individuals concealed by their talent and notoriety. The industry shielded predators, abusers, and manipulators for many years. To begin with, however, we must comprehend why the first name on Carson's list drew his most distaste and the intimate backstage altercation that has never been made public. First of all, they all probably know that I'm stage-struck. Second, I look for movies with audience identification. The Hollywood queen with ice in her veins is Joan Crawford. The Tonight Show's audience witnessed the poised Hollywood icon they had loved for decades when Joan Crawford made an appearance in 1970. Crawford personified vintage Hollywood glitz with her flawless posture, spotless beauty, and honed charisma. Crawford's off-camera behavior, however, showed a completely different side of himself, according to many Tonight Show crew members. Among the coldest persons I've ever interviewed was her. Years later, Carson told his biographer that Crawford's beauty started to cause issues before she even got to the studio, like speaking to a gorgeous statue that had nothing inside. The technical director of the event still kept the 4-page document in his archives decades after she made her demands, which included precise lighting specifications. A previous producer remarked that everything had to be exact. Johnny's desk height, her chair's angle, and even the studio's temperature exactly 67 degrees, not 66 or 68. Crawford brought her own cosmetics crew even though the show had award-winning makeup professionals on staff when she eventually showed up, 3 hours before taping. The way Crawford treated people differently depending on their value, however, was what really showed her character. She virtually curtsied to Johnny, according to a stagehand who was there that day, but Crawford lost it when a young production assistant brought water into her dressing room without permission. Crawford went on a rant so savage that employees in the corridor froze in disbelief, according to many witnesses. According to reports, she branded the assistant, a 20-year-old woman who was just beginning out in the business, a stupid little tramp, and advised her to look for employment at a brothel where her lack of skills might be a strength. Crawford insisted on firing the young woman as she ran away in tears. Tension arose during the recording when Carson's producer refused. However, Crawford's calculating transformation as soon as the cameras started was more unsettling than even the manner she treated the employees. She was a machine masquerading as a lady. Recall. Every response and every giggle had been practiced by her. There was nothing real in every impromptu moment. During commercial breaks, Crawford would suddenly stop smiling and sit in stony quiet, talking to no one, but she would instantly come back to life when the red light returned. Carson, who was renowned for his ability to put people at ease, found it difficult to establish a genuine bond with Crawford. He allegedly remarked Ed McMahon, "I've interviewed corpses with more personality," following the performance. Not surprisingly, years later, Christina Crawford's memoir, Mommy Dearest, exposed Joan's alleged mistreatment of her adopted children. He only nodded and remarked, "I saw who she really was in those few hours," according to close friends. I trust all of the statements. However, Carson was even more intimidated by his next adversary than he was by Crawford's calculating coldness. Raw power is used to threaten and intimidate. I can respond to that by telling you that I portray Chloe and Daphnis throughout those beautiful times. Carson was unable to tolerate the charming bully Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra and Johnny Carson seemed to get along well, even friendly, on TV. Carson was the dignified host, and the iconic singer would joke, share stories, and sometimes even perform. However, it was said that behind the scenes, Carson detested Sinatra not because of his skill, which he admired, but rather because of the way the elderly blue-eyed singer treated people when he believed no one of importance was looking. He would be an enforcer for the mob if he didn't sing. According to several books, Carson once told a friend, and occasionally, I believe, he was both. Members of the crew were notoriously tense during Sinatra's Tonight Show appearances. Sinatra would arrive with an entourage of up to 8 men, according to long-standing staff, who were described as not show industry types, but like the kind of folks you wouldn't want to encounter in an alley. One cameraman compared the feeling created by these men spreading across the studio to that of being under surveillance as they watched the employees. The way Sinatra handled those he considered beneath him, however, was what really unsettled Carson. When Sinatra made an appearance in the early 1970s, a floor manager erred by giving him the customary 3-minute notice prior to his segment. "No one informs me when I've got 3 minutes," Sinatra reportedly said as he seized the man by his tie and drew him in close. "I'll continue when I'm prepared." The floor supervisor. After the Korean War, a 50-year-old veteran was clearly affected. The segment was almost cancelled by Carson when he observed this exchange on his office monitor. The producer persuaded him to go on only after reminding him of the ratings Sinatra would bring. Tension also arose from Sinatra's dependability, or lack thereof. There have been several reported instances of him abruptly canceling appearances, including one where he was already in the building 2 hours prior to taping but decided he wasn't in the mood. Sinatra's remark regarding a female employee's attractiveness during a commercial break was the most revealing because it was audible to everyone around him. Carson retorted icily, "We don't talk about my staff that way here," breaching his customary professional distance. There was a noticeable sense of tension, and Sinatra appeared shocked that anyone, including Johnny Carson, would challenge him. Both men continued to present themselves professionally when the cameras re-entered the scene, but crew members saw that Carson's questioning had become noticeably less involved and shorter. Following that visit, Carson allegedly told his producer, "I don't care what his ratings are, limit him to once a." This is especially noteworthy because Carson hardly ever participated in booking decisions and hardly ever explicitly barred guests. It was clear how much he disliked Sinatra's actions that he limited the singer's appearances. Although Sinatra exemplified the bullying aspect of celebrity power, Carson's next problematic visitor displayed an entirely different kind of difficulty, the enormous ego that had no regard for conventions or bounds. One counterargument to my assertion is that the earth is filled. Every top young director is saturated. The genius Orson Welles believed that regulations were not important to him. Orson Welles made several appearances on The Tonight Show during the Carson era, consistently producing television that viewers would remember thanks to his powerful voice, commanding presence, and incredible tales from his illustrious career. Home viewers witnessed a smart, endearing raconteur. Something more was noticed by Carson and his team. A man who had become so conceited that he felt he was exempt from the standard rules of television. According to reports, following one very challenging Welles appearance, Carson declared, "Never again." That man still believes he is in charge of Rome. In most cases, the issues started before Welles even got to the studio. Welles consistently rejected any planned questions or ideas that Carson's crew came up with, according to Tonight Show writers. According to him, our inquiries were. According to one former writer, it was plain and plain. In fact, he marked them all out and returned a blank paper. Carson was forced to interview one of the most important people in film without any planning or structure, which was awkward because Welles had a habit of starting long, convoluted anecdotes that were hard to cut in time. Welles was supposed to appear for a 7-minute section during one occasion in the mid-1970s. Carson gave him several subtle signs that it was time to wrap up, but he ignored them and remained on the couch for almost 25 minutes. A director indicated that when time was running low, Johnny would send guests a series of signals. Noticed everyone and simply continued to speak. We had to completely bump 2 other visitors. Wells treated the employees in an equally contemptuous manner. Despite the fact that they were standing right next to him, he allegedly refused to address production helpers directly, instead using the third person. "Let the girl know that I need more water." Or have the boy change the light. Wells' tendency to approach The Tonight Show more like his own personal platform than Carson's show was what particularly annoyed Carson, according to many who knew him well. A former producer described how Orson would bring props, abruptly switch topics, and even try to control camera angles from his seat. "He even got up once and attempted to instruct our camera operators on the proper angles to employ." Johnny felt furious. "It doesn't justify anything," Carson allegedly told Ed McMahon after one especially difficult appearance. "Just because you're smart doesn't mean you can take over someone else's show." Wells' disrespect for television's limitations particularly irritated Carson, who is a perfectionist when it comes to television production. Despite his outward admiration for Wells' enormous achievements to cinema, he started to see him in private as a warning about what happens when ego overshadows brilliance. Although Wells exemplified the difficulty of managing an excessive personality, Carson's subsequent challenging visitor posed an alternative issue. "It is the majority, eh?" Bette Davis, the verbal aggression queen of Hollywood. The iconic actress, who was elegant even in her latter years and full of intriguing Hollywood history, was at her most captivating when she came on The Tonight Show. She told humorous stories in her unique voice. They failed to see the moments before and after the red light was turned on, when Davis allegedly displayed a personality so harsh that even the unflappable Carson was surprised. "She doesn't require a platform." According to reports, Carson told Ed McMahon that she needed a courtroom following an especially challenging appearance. "Without a lawyer present, Bette Davis shouldn't have to cross-examine anyone." According to several Tonight Show staff stories, Davis's handling of other guests was her first transgression. When Davis was scheduled to appear on programs with several celebrities, he would frequently talk over or interrupt them, particularly if they were women or younger performers. She would physically turn away from other couch users. If someone else was telling a story that made people laugh, you could see her getting angry and making plans to take control again, according to a former talent coordinator. Davis was even more difficult behind the scenes. According to reports, she insisted on having whiskey in her dressing room prior to appearances. Although her drinking was common for visitors in her period, it occasionally resulted in offensive remarks and actions. Working on the show in the 1970s, female staff members claimed that Davis frequently used racist and sexist language that was shocking even by the norms of the period. Davis turned down her services, according to one makeup artist, who requested someone whose hands didn't shake like they were coming off a 3-day intoxication. "Hey Carson," who tended to steer clear of conflict, made an exception for Davis when she started reprimanding a cue card holder for moving too slowly during a practice. In fact, Johnny intervened, recalling a production assistant who saw the event happen. In a very low voice, he informed her, "On this show, Ms. Davis, we either treat everyone with respect or we don't talk at all." She was shocked and perhaps unaccustomed to being pushed back, but she gave in. The disparity between Davis's apparent brilliance and her treatment of others was what Carson found most challenging. Davis was a true legend whose work Carson valued, in contrast to some challenging visitors who could be written off as untalented. That's the last time, Carson reportedly warned his producer after her last appearance on the show in the early 1980s. "Because life is too short to be verbally abused by Bette Davis. Regardless of the number of Oscars she has." Davis at least targeted adults who were capable of defending themselves with her jabs, but Carson's next unruly guest introduced a new level of discomfort and behavior towards young women that went beyond professional bounds. I'm referring to the elderly child star with straying hands, Mickey Rooney. From 1939 to 1941, Mickey Rooney was the top-grossing star at the box office and a living reminder of the heyday of the film business. His appearances on The Tonight Show ought to have been sentimental remembrances of a remarkable career. Instead, Rooney's trips gained a bad reputation due to his aggressive behavior, erratic energy, and sporadic drinking, according to several staff testimonies. Carson reportedly informed his producer that following one especially troublesome appearance in the mid-1970s, he believes that his diminutive stature gives him permission to be a pervert. Among female employees, Rooney, who was in his mid-50s at the time, gained a reputation for inappropriate touching, making sexual remarks, and disregarding professional boundaries. When young production helpers found out that Rooney was scheduled, they would request to be moved, according to several stories. Whenever you brought him water, he would clutch your hand. Attempt to draw you nearer. Inquire about your marital status, recounted a former show assistant from the late 1970s. He'd hang on to your wrist a bit too long if you tried to get away. The fact that Rooney seemed incapable of identifying when he had consumed too much alcohol was even more worrisome. Employees of The Tonight Show said that he slurred words and lost his train of thought in the middle of sentences during at least 3 separate appearances, demonstrating his obvious intoxication. Rooney started a story about Judy Garland during one notorious episode in 1977, but it soon got improper, so Carson interrupted him and changed the subject. Carson allegedly questioned his producer after the commercial break, "Is he intoxicated, or is this just who he is now?" The age difference in perceptions of what was considered proper behavior was what Carson found most challenging about Rooney. Rooney was born in 1920 and comes from a time in Hollywood when certain behaviors towards women were normal, if not accepted. A director who worked on the show for many years noted that while Johnny was not a prude, he had clear boundaries about professional behavior. When challenged up on his behavior, Rooney appeared truly perplexed, as if he didn't know why it was an issue. Carson took the uncommon step of personally apologizing to the young girl after the filming following one appearance in which Rooney made repeated remarks about her being on the show that night. According to the director, "I have never witnessed Johnny so mortified by a guest's actions. He told her, 'That's how professionals act on my show and it won't happen again.'" True to his word, Rooney's appearances became less frequent in the late 1970s and early 1980s, with Carson reportedly insisting on daytime pre-tapings rather than live evening broadcasts when Rooney was booked. While Rooney's behavior created uncomfortable situations, Carson's next challenging guest brought a different kind of difficulty, demands so extensive and unreasonable they became legendary among the staff. "I don't see, my last marriage was one day and I didn't sing it. Lost it." Zsa Gabor, the diva who drove Carson to despair. With her glamorous appearance, distinctive accent and flirtatious personality, Zsa Gabor was a Tonight Show favorite who appeared dozens of times during Carson's tenure. Viewers saw a charming, over-the-top personality who played up her Hungarian background in many marriages for laughs. Behind the scenes, according to numerous staff accounts, Gabor was one of the most demanding difficult guests in the show's history. "I'd rather interview a cat," Carson reportedly quipped, after a particularly exhausting Gabor appearance. "At least the cat wouldn't need 3 assistants and special lighting." Gabor's demands began long before she arrived at the studio. According to former Tonight Show employees, her standard requirements included a specific temperature in her dressing room, 74 degrees, fresh flowers, orchids only. No carnations. A bottle of Perrier water with exactly 3 ice cubes. Her own lighting technician flown in at the show's expense. No female guests who were younger than 40 booked on the same episode. Her writer read like a parody of celebrity demands. Recalled a former talent coordinator. "We thought it was a joke the first time we got it." When these requirements weren't met exact, Gabor reportedly would refuse to leave her dressing room until the situation was rectified, often delaying taping and throwing off the entire show's schedule. One of the most infamous incidents occurred when Gabor arrived for a taping and discovered the makeup department didn't have her preferred brand of foundation. According to multiple witnesses, she got into a shouting match with the head makeup artist, demanding someone be sent to Beverly Hills immediately to purchase the correct. Johnny actually had to intervene, a former producer remembered. He called her directly and said something like, "Zaza, honey, you look beautiful already and we have a show to do. Let's save the cosmetics emergency for another day." What particularly irked Carson about Gabor's behavior was how it affected the overall production. The show's well-planned schedule would be thrown into disarray, crew people would have to put in extra hours, and other guests would be kept waiting. After one appearance, Carson reportedly told his executive producer that Gabor had grumbled about her introduction after arriving 40 minutes late. "The next time she wishes to appear, let her know that I'd be delighted to be her sidekick and that the show has been renamed The Tonight Show, featuring Zsa Gabor." Despite these annoyances, Gabor remained on the show during Carson's tenure, which is evidence of her unquestionable entertainment value when the camera was really rolling. A different kind of pain was brought forth by Carson's next difficult guest, while Gabor's diva demands caused practical problems. A casual interview could easily devolve into an awkward conflict due to unpredictable behavior. The irritating mother. Shelley Winters, the powder keg of unpredictability. The two-time Oscar winner Shelley Winters had a career that spanned decades, from character parts in her old years to flashy roles in her younger years. Her expertise, accomplishments, and Hollywood anecdotes should have made her the perfect guest on The Tonight Show. Those who worked on the show said that Winters was actually one of Carson's most erratic guests. She doesn't speak. She explodes. According to Carson, during one very dramatic appearance, Winters gained a reputation among the show's employees for her unwillingness or incapacity to adjust to the light. Entertainment-oriented late-night television format. Instead of offering humorous tales or promoting ongoing initiatives, she would frequently break into passionate political tirades or intensely personal confessions that made Carson clearly uncomfortable. Winters' 5-minute unbroken diatribe about government corruption during one appearance in the mid-1970s swiftly turned from a straightforward inquiry about a current movie, leaving Carson unable to come up with a humorous way to switch to a commercial. Controlling talks, huh? It was like trying to steer a tornado with Shelley, a previous director recounted. He could only wait until she ran out of steam when she started. Winter was unpredictable not just in the subjects she discussed. She also has a reputation for having violent outbursts. After fellow guest Oliver Reed made sexist remarks, she famously tossed a glass of whiskey in his face during an appearance on a British talk program. Staff members were anxious every time she was booked because of her reputation for being volatile. Certain items from the set when we knew she was coming, admitted a former stage manager. Anything that could be thrown or knocked over would mysteriously disappear before her segments. Despite these challenges, what distinguished Winters from some of Carson's other difficult guests was that her behavior seemed to stem from genuine passion rather than malice or ego. She cared deeply about political and social issues and saw every public appearance as an opportunity to address them, regardless of the venue's appropriateness. Carson, while visibly uncomfortable during her more intense moments, maintained a certain respect for Winters' authenticity. After one particularly appearance where she criticized the Vietnam War, reportedly told his producer, nevertheless, Winters' appearances became less frequent in the later years of Carson's tenure, with the host preferring guests whose conversational style complemented rather than challenged the show's format. While Winters' passionate unpredictability created on-air challenges, Carson's next difficult guest represented something he found personally distasteful. I like big muscles and red corpuscles. I like a beautiful. Jane Russell was one of Hollywood's most iconic sex symbols of the 1940s and 50s, known for films like The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. With her striking beauty and significant place in film history, she seemed like a natural recurring guest for The Tonight Show. Yet after a few appearances in 1970s, Russell rarely returned to Carson's couch, a decision that, according to show insiders, stemmed from Carson's discomfort with her increasingly extreme political views and reported treatment of LGBTQ+ staff members. Carson, while personally a moderate Republican for much of his life, maintained a strict policy of keeping The Tonight Show relatively neutral on divisive political issues. Russell, however, reportedly used backstage interactions to express hardline conservative views that Carson found troubling. Johnny could handle guests having different political opinions, explained a former producer. What bothered him was when those opinions turned into personal attacks on staff members or other guests. According to several accounts, Russell became notorious for making disparaging comments about LGBTQ+ individuals working on the show. During one appearance in the early 1970s, she allegedly refused to allow a gay makeup artist to touch her face, demanding a replacement. Even more concerning to Carson was a reported incident involving Rock Hudson. According to a talent coordinator who worked on the show, Russell refused to be booked on the same episode as Hudson, making derogatory comments about his sexuality, which, though not publicly acknowledged at the time, was known within Hollywood circles. Johnny had many friends in the gay community, including several staff members. Talent coordinator recalled, he was ahead of his time and not tolerating that kind of discrimination on his show. Carson's final breaking point with Russell allegedly came during a 1973 appearance when she made dismissive comments about civil rights legislation during a commercial break. Though not picked up on broadcast microphones, her remarks were overheard by several crew members and reportedly reached Carson's ears. After that appearance, Russell was noticeably absent from The Tonight Show's guest roster for the remainder of Carson's tenure. One of the few clear cases where Carson appears to have personally vetoed future bookings. What made this situation particularly notable was Carson's general reluctance to ban guests outright, especially those with Russell's level of star power and historical significance to Hollywood. For him to take such a definitive stance spoke volumes about how strongly he objected to her behavior. While Russell's politics and treatment of staff created a permanent rift with Carson, his final and perhaps most intense dislike was reserved for a comedian whose public persona and private behavior were reportedly worlds apart. I've never asked you this, but I'm asking you now, simply purely hold it. Jerry Lewis, the comedian Carson called truly hateful. Jerry Lewis was one of America's most successful entertainers, a groundbreaking comedian, actor, director, and humanitarian known for his annual telethons benefiting muscular dystrophy research. His manic energy and physical comedy had made him a global star. Behind the scenes, according to numerous Tonight Show staff accounts, Lewis was also one of the most difficult, demeaning celebrities in Hollywood, a reputation that earned him a special place on Carson's personal blacklist. He's what happens when ego outruns talent. Carson reportedly told a colleague, after a particularly troublesome Lewis appearance in the mid-1970s. Unlike some difficult guests who saved their worst behavior for underlings, Lewis reportedly made no secret of his disdain for Carson himself. During one infamous appearance, Lewis repeatedly talked over Carson, hijacked questions intended for other guests, and at one point actually reached over and adjusted Carson's tie without permission, a move that visibly annoyed the normally unflappable host. A former producer explained, "Rule. You don't touch Johnny unless he initiates it." Lewis knew this and did it anyway as a power move. Lewis's treatment of crew members was allegedly even worse. According to several accounts, he would refuse to learn staffers' names, referring to them as "hey you" or by their function, camera guy, makeup, girl, regardless of their experience or seniority. One particularly disturbing incident occurred when a camera operator reportedly coughed quietly during Lewis's rehearsal. According to multiple witnesses, Lewis stopped everything and launched into a tirade, screaming that the cameraman was a professional who breathes like an amateur and demanding he be removed from the studio. Jerry screamed at a camera op for breathing loudly, confirmed a floor manager who was present. Not talking, breathing, the poor guy had allergies. What Carson found most objectionable about Lewis was the contrast between his public persona as a tireless champion for children and his private behavior toward people who couldn't benefit his career. The Jekyll and Hyde routine made Johnny's skin crawl, recalled a producer who worked. He'd watch Jerry cry on his telethon about loving children, then come to our show and treat people like they were subhuman. After Lewis's final appearance on The Tonight Show in the early 1980s, Carson reportedly told his executive producer simply, "Never again." Though Carson rarely banned guests outright, Lewis joined the small group of celebrities who were effectively blacklisted from the show during its final decade. Years later, when asked about Lewis at a private dinner, Carson reportedly said something that shocked those present with its uncharacteristic harshness. "In a town full of phonies, he stands out as truly hateful. And that takes some doing." What Carson's blacklist reveals about Hollywood's true nature. Johnny Carson's private feelings about these 9 difficult guests: Joan Crawford, Frank Sinatra, Orson Welles, Betty Davis, Mickey Rooney, Zsa Gabor. The show's well-planned schedule would be thrown into disarray, crew people would have to put in extra hours, and other guests would be kept waiting. After one appearance, Carson reportedly told his executive producer that Gabor had grumbled about her introduction after arriving 40 minutes late. "The next time she wishes to appear, let her know that I'd be delighted to be her sidekick and that the show has been renamed The Tonight Show, featuring Zsa Gabor." Despite these annoyances, Gabor remained on the show during Carson's tenure, which is evidence of her unquestionable entertainment value when the camera was really rolling. A different kind of pain was brought forth by Carson's next difficult guest, while Gabor's diva demands caused practical problems. A casual interview could easily devolve into an awkward conflict due to unpredictable behavior. The irritating mother. Shelley Winters, the powder keg of unpredictability. The two-time Oscar winner Shelley Winters had a career that spanned decades, from character parts in her old years to flashy roles in her younger years. Her expertise, accomplishments, and Hollywood anecdotes should have made her the perfect guest on The Tonight Show. Those who worked on the show said that Winters was actually one of Carson's most erratic guests. She doesn't speak. She explodes. According to Carson, during one very dramatic appearance, Winters gained a reputation among the show's employees